Hey everyone, Chris here from AV.technology. I'm here with Aidan, CEO of Audinate. Thanks for joining us, Aidan.
You're welcome. Good to see you again.
We're here for the occasion of the 20th anniversary of Audinate. So that gives us the luxury of looking back and maybe telling an origin story that not many people will know. We did have a bit of a conversation about this 10 years ago. It was pretty cool from memory, but I'd like to revisit it. So let's cast our minds back to maybe even the 90s, Aidan. Like, you were a musician.
Mm-hmm.
What it sort of, I guess, provided you the inspiration, the very germ of the idea for Dante?
Yeah. So in the 90s, I by background, I'm an electrical engineer, computer sciencey kind of guy. I played music through school. So I played trumpet in high school, played orchestral music, things like that. And in my university days, doing electrical engineering, I was kind of always interested in things like audio and sound. And one of the main reasons for wanting to do electrical engineering was that I grew up in the country and I was always interested in how things worked. And I could, look at mechanical things or disassemble stuff or whatever it is, and you could get an idea of how those things worked. But whenever I looked inside something like a TV or a radio or whatever, it was just completely inscrutable. Like, you just look at it and you go, I have no idea how this works. So I really wanted to go to, the Hogwarts School of Wizards and understand, how the electrical stuff worked, which is why I ended up doing electrical engineering. And that dovetailed really well with my interest in music and sound. And so even though I spent the first part of my career very much in the IT world, in networking, firewall security and stuff like that, I always had a long-term interest in music and electronics and audio generally and software. And so I was very fortunate. So the 90s for me were very much about IT stuff, networking, like really building up the background in networking technologies. And in the sort of early 2000s, that then translated into, I guess, the ideal opportunity to put together electronics, audio, networking, software, and that was really the really long backstory and how I got to the kind of Dante world.
And digital audio wasn't really on computers so much. We were recording on ADATs.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
And Tascams, DA38s. And
I was a little bit after that kind of thing, but I did actually have bits of equipment that had ADAT ports on it. So I was going like, what the hell is that for?
Yeah. Well, a useful port, but
for sure.
I guess where we're headed is yet another protocol, yet another plug at the back of an interface.
Right.
So I guess tell me about your thoughts in those when you had your own studio. Like, no one's pretending you were like, running Sing Sing, but you were a musician doing stuff at home and you were kind of contending with, I guess, all the various flavors of audio, digital audio.
Yeah. So I was doing, I was playing music, at my local church. I ended up recording myself and I ended up recording, various people and things like that. Yeah. So, a lot of the sort of background for Dante and Audinate was actually informed by some of that process. And if you cast your mind back, I actually have like one of the kind of original like recording interfaces. So this thing.
Is that the Mark II or the Mark I?
This is the Mark II. I didn't have a Mark I, but anyway, this at the time was the bee's knees. And so this particular recording interface has a bunch of analog inputs in it and outputs, and it also has FireWire ports. And so before USB, there was like FireWire. FireWire, there was this, So it was a sort of, it was probably ended up really being a quite Apple-specific thing, even though you could make it work on PCs if you really tried hard. But this dates from the very beginning of the development of Dante World. So these were great units. I really liked these. And FireWire was really the way that people would connect to computers and then ultimately USB.
Yeah.
So as someone that did live sound stuff, and like actually I played live as well as recorded, for me, I was working in networking, plug and play networking at the time. And so I kept on unplugging everything, dragging it off somewhere else, plugging it back in again. And so the idea that this was actually really a networking problem, all the cabling parts were really a networking problem, came home very much to me. And I also knew that everything inside these sorts of products is all digital. So the idea that you had to have a weird box in order to convert the digital bit that was inside your keyboard back into analog, and then weird box turns it back into digital again to put it in the computer. To me, all of the cabling and wiring was really a networking problem.
Right.
And the other thing is, if you ever plug it in the wrong socket, it seriously doesn't work. Whereas networking doesn't matter which port you plug it into, it still works. So that kind of background in plug and play networking from my my day job at places like Motorola Labs, working on plug and play home networking, kind of informed. I could look at this wiring and plugging and patching and everything else and kind of go, really it's a plug and play networking problem. So if we could crack how to make the networking really easy to use so that, no magic numbers, no IP addresses and MAC addresses, then musicians or AV people could plug this stuff together really easily. And at the time, people did this is when Pro Tools and, Imagic Logic before it got bought by Apple. So, all those things, people were doing all of their production in computers. So they spent their entire time converting signals backwards and forwards into computers.
Gotcha.
So the Audinate.technology concept came out of that. It was about solving a kind of cabling and wiring problem and also an interfacing in and out of computer equipment.
So do you want to talk about like how far you got when you were with Motorola versus going, you then entered a stage where you were doing it as a research project that was government funded. What was sort of what happened exactly there?
Yeah, so the journey really, when I was at Motorola Labs in Australia, I was spending most of my time working on networking technologies, so plug and play home networking technologies of various sorts. So it really had nothing to do with this sort of Dante type stuff at all. But Motorola, if you've been following technology industries for a while, there was a sort of tech wreck and a tech boom and a telecoms boom and bust. And in one of those sort of down periods, Motorola Labs actually closed. And so they just laid off all of the people who I used to work with. And that meant, I met people like Chris Ware, I think you've already spoken to, Varuni, Andrew, various other co-founders who are still with Audinate and some other people. And it's a bit of a silver lining. There's a sort of blessing in a disguise. If you get laid off, if everyone gets laid off, it's an opportunity for you to hand pick the team you'd like to play with. So we pitched our project really to NICTA, which is it's now part of CSIRO actually, Data 61. But I viewed that essentially as an incubator activity. I really wanted to, my experience of developing R&D technology inside Motorola was great, good training, but it's very hard to find someone else who'll grab hold of your ideas and take it the whole way to the hoop. So for me, one of the frustrations of working in a big company like Motorola was to try and find an intrapreneur that would take your stuff and take it to market was very difficult when you were just in an R&D role. So I joined NICTA with the express desire to, if we were going to build something or make something, I was going to take it the whole way through to the hoop. So I always intended to spin out, start a company, and die trying.
That's remarkable.
In terms of trying to get it to happen, because I was not going to leave it up to someone else to try and see the magic and grab hold of it.
Yeah, that's remarkable. So did the NICTA experience, was that like a sort of a 10 out of 10 experience that got you to where you wanted to go as like a startup?
Yeah, like for me, the NICTA experience is actually really good, and it's an interesting organisation. Or at the time, it was an interesting organisation because it was a real sort of. It probably had a fairly academic bent to it, even though its intent or rationale was to do what's called basic use inspired research. And my like handle on that was, if you could find somebody who cared, like as in a non-academic, who cared if your stuff worked or not, then it was kind of use inspired. So I always felt like I was doing use inspired work because at NICTA, one of the things I tried to do was to get out and talk to every possible Australian audio company I could come across. And so that process was actually really good. NICTA paid essentially, a small team of people to do the R&D, and so I didn't have the cash for that. So from the point of view of, was it a good and successful thing? For me personally, it was. And I also think actually, the Dante project was totally successful from a taxpayer perspective as well. Because, now we've got we got 85, 90 people here in Australia. The amount of income tax we have paid has dwarfed the amount that was spent on us at the time. So, so I think that all worked quite well.
So just to remind people, because network audio is almost like the water we swim in now. So it's easy to forget the big challenge that you solved. Do you want to just explain that?
Yeah, for sure. So, what were we doing at the time that was sort of different or novel, that kind of thing? I agree with you. I think it is easy to sort of look back and go, oh, well, that was fairly straightforward.
What's all the fuss about?
Yeah, what's all the fuss about? So, at the time, there was a lot of sort of transition. Gigabit Ethernet, like the network speeds were a lot slower. They were 100 meg, not gigabit. So we were in that sort of world. There were various competing technologies at the time. We were not the first, and actually probably sort of shout out to people like Kevin Gross and the CobraNet people for really breaking some hard ground. Like those guys were icebreakers in that they had a lot of people going, you cannot do this. It's physically not possible to use networking for sending and receiving audio. And so I'm conscious that they definitely butted their heads against those people in the industry a bit. So there was the CobraNet world, the EtherSound world. There was a whole flock of other technologies, and then there was us. And then a bit later, there was the Firewire over Ethernet world, which is AVB. Yeah. So the one sort of one-line summary of AVB is try and take the way Firewire worked, and then try and warp Ethernet to make it match the way Firewire works. Right. And so they were the sort of things that were out there in the soup at the time. I would say that our big contribution to the world of networking was because we came out of the plug and play networking world, home networking, making things really easy to use. We knew how to do self-configuring, automatic addressing, as I said before, it's no magic numbers. You have to be able to set something up without plugging in IP addresses or MAC addresses or anything like that. As soon as you get the users to start configuring loads of random numbers that have to be unique, stuff stops working when they accidentally typo a couple of numbers and they're no longer unique. And those things are really hard to debug. So there was that piece. And then I think an underappreciated part was we were basically all networking people. So one of my other quips is Audinate is not an audio company or a video company. We're a networking company. So we really got how the networking actually worked in a very deep sense. And so we designed Dante to exploit the improving network speed. So going from 100 megabits to a gig and then 10 gig and beyond. So you'll find Dante scales, right? Doesn't depend on the link speed. You can just make the system get bigger based on how much networking you have.
And sync?
Yep, synchronization as well. So that was a big deal. And again, that was dependent on knowing how the networking works. So the way I would describe, so just backing up briefly, I will come to the sync bit. Backing up briefly, things like CobraNet, EtherSound, even AVB, with its sort of Firewire heritage, what people are really trying to do with those is they're trying to take an audio concept like a TDM bus or some such thing like that, and then trying to map that onto an Ethernet network, which fundamentally doesn't do that. And so they approach the sync like that. So they try and have, in CobraNet, a conductor packet that kind of is super regular, and that's not how Ethernet networks behave. Sure. So one of the big things we did was exploit the behavior of the Ethernet networks to provide good quality sync and really scalable bandwidth, loads of channels. And to do that, that, to build the implementation so that manufacturers didn't have to do surgery or build their own Rube Goldberg machine to get it done. Yeah.
And were you one of the first to get multicast right?
Yeah, I would say that, and yes, probably, and I think I would say it in a odd way, in the sense that when we did our first prototypes with Dante, almost everything, pretty much everything was multicast, with the sort of very principled view that in the end, if you had only one receiver for multicast, it was essentially the same as unicast. Where I am today is I actually feel that we did the right thing by actually sort of pivoting away from having lots of multicast in our systems. And this is because most practical networks, when they're deployed, nobody ever really tests the multicast bit. So what happens is people dump down a bunch of network switches and then they kind of check facebook.com or whatever it is. And that bit is it's actually all unicast. So in Dante world, our defaults are pretty much all unicast, minimal amounts of multicast. You need multicast for sync and discovery and stuff like that. But you really don't want to send loads of high rate multicast around the place. Can do, speak all the protocols, definitely got it right in our implementation side of things. But I think one of the underappreciated things is that the best thing to do with multicast is to try not to use it. Yes. Yeah. Unless you really need it. And the use case where you really need multicast is kind of like quite specific. It's like when you have one sender that needs to go to many, many, many receivers. So that's like a sender scaling kind of concept. And actually, for a lot of systems, you don't need to use it. And it probably just complicates your network setup more than anything else.
So maybe just to cast your mind back to the early days, you had a product that worked, that was doing something well and doing something different, but you had a bit of a wait and see market. Like, describe sort of some of those early demos and talking to people.
Yeah. So, it was a very interesting time. I think we were the beneficiary of having some interested parties. I think I mentioned before that when I was at NICTA doing the development work, I really actively spent, like, I feel like we knew about networking, but we didn't necessarily know about professional AV and the market that we were trying to play in. So I really actively went around and tried to contact every single audio company that I could find in Australia, and went and talked to them and said, hey, we have this thing, happy to teach you about networking. Do you want to teach me about audio stuff? Like, it's not that we don't know about audio stuff, it's just there's a lot of know-how in given markets and segments. And so I think one of the people that was extremely helpful to us early on in life was Bruce Jackson. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned him on the way through. So this is a great opportunity to do that. Yeah. So I've actually got actually a book of Bruce's. So we have this in the foyer at Audinate because Bruce, this is actually a book about Bruce's role with Elvis. And Bruce actually was a famous front of house mixer. And unfortunately, he's passed away in a plane crash. But Bruce was front of house for Bruce Springsteen, Barbra Streisand, Elvis. Elvis was fascinating because Bruce could fly a plane and he could mix front of house. Yeah. And when he had that plane, he promoted the Fairlight CMI. So he actually flew that thing around all over the US and demoed it to people and stuff like that. So Bruce was one of those great people who could see the potential in things and was quite creative. And I remember specifically, like, so we went over and spoke to Bruce when he was at Dolby, and you know, they would come over, him and Dave McGrath. Dave McGrath was the brains behind the operation, and Bruce was the
rock star.
Absolutely, he was the rock star. And they would come over and they'd watch these demos. And then I remember I came over, I was playing my keyboard through a system, and Bruce went, I know where the money went. Because he was just mentally going, oh yeah, we spent a lot making this Dante technology. I know where the money went. And he wrote, right, the Dolby Lake processor, I'm going to change the hardware on that. I've manufactured 50 units. going forward, every unit will now have a bigger, fatter FPGA. And when you finally get this working on FPGAs, we'll firmware update every single one of them. So Bruce actually redesigned his product, put in a fatter FPGA and said, we're going to do this.
Wow.
And then he started introducing us to people he knew. We were starting to do road shows and things like that. So he was a very important and encouraging person. And you really do need somebody like as an entrepreneur who can kind of catch so many people don't see where it could go.
Sure.
And you just need
too scared.
You just need one or two people that can give you a little bit of encouragement on the way. And Bruce was definitely one of those.
And famously, like Bruce with his Apogee Electronics hat on, cared a lot about how things digital sounded. So he must have been in your ear a bit about that as well.
Well, this was the thing. So, my framing of this as like, I can teach you about networking. Man, I know that stuff. But Brucey absolutely knew about the audio quality and, how to get good quality out of a variety of bits of equipment. And the Dolby Lake processor is still great. Sure. Like the electronics in it is very high.
He was big on clocking, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. Yeah. So all that stuff about clocking, synchronization, jitter performance, everything else. We not only had Bruce's production golden ears compared, his interest in the quality of it, but we also, Bruce also had Dave McGrath behind the scenes as well. So we had the very hardcore, it has to do this kind of performance measures behind the thing too.
Yeah, that's an amazing connection to have as an early days.
It's very encouraging.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about, now that you've got those connections and perhaps Bruce is introducing you to a few industry connections, how do you recall, I guess, that next phase of industry acceptance?
Yeah, well, it took a long time. Like it really did. You got investors, and investors are going like, "Where's the hockey stick?" They want and really, it was a long, slow battle. And I think one of the things looking back is inevitably when you're creating a technology that gets embedded inside people's products, in physical products, there's always a design cycle. So these things have a bit of it takes 12, 18 months to do the electronics design or update something and then get it manufactured and get it to market. So these things have like a fairly longish time horizon. So one of the things I would say now when I look back is it's not so much one of those Silicon Valley hockey stick things. It's more like Warren Buffett and compound interest. Sort of like, if you just keep plugging away year by year by year, then actually you look back 10 years later and you go, holy cow, that really did grow. So those early days were very much just doing everything we possibly could in order to get products built, to get people to catch the vision, and to try and help manufacturers to get their products used at major events. And the Dolby Lake processor was great for that because it was people like Kieran Walsh in the UK were using that for the Queen's Jubilee. And it's like massive event. Dolby Lake processors. There was things like World Youth Day. So there were lots of big events where people were using those early products, and they were all very helpful. But it was a long process with people like Yamaha, Bosch, coming on board, and I guess we got a lot of validation out of those larger companies. Yeah. But they're not necessarily the most fast-moving companies, shall we say?
So, what are some of the You went into that phase of establishing yourself and industry acceptance and building chips and what was from there kind of some of the key developments that turned you guys from being a supporter and a component supplier to manufacturers to sort of a end user's best friend? Do you know where I'm headed?
I think so. Yeah, it's probably sort of a question of what are the ingredients that sort of made it catch fire as opposed to maybe all these other things that were out there or still people are trying to promote.
Because you could just be another OEM supplier and a chip guy. But you clearly that wasn't the vision. So
yeah, I mean, we could be AVB or we could be AS67 or we could be anything. But you know, it's I think there's a few things that happened. There's from a manufacturer perspective, we are, like, as a company, our entire existence is to provide the Dante technology and for it to be interoperable. You know, I quip that we basically sell interoperability to the industry.
Yeah.
So if you're a manufacturer and you want to, and you're kind of pragmatically running some engineering team and you kind of go, I make only microphones, I need to connect to an ecosystem. And I really like designing microphones. I'm not sure I really want to spend my engineering dollars writing a whole shed load of networking. Who do I go to? And so we literally are a company in the industry who exists to provide networking technology and interoperability. Gotcha. So that works for people. And having a toolbox, small, medium, large, you know, that sort of stuff that manufacturers can put in. The other piece I would say has got to do with the end user parts, and they've been right back at the very beginning. And part of it is innovation, and part of it is actually delivering a product, a total sort of product set that works for people. So I would say that the plug and play part of it was critically important, that your average AV professional was not endlessly frustrated dicking around with MAC addresses and IP addresses and going, why haven't I got a Cisco certification to get the damn thing to work? So that lowering of the friction around the networking stuff, very important. To having tools like Dante Controller, that was cross-manufacturer. You didn't have to rely, the manufacturers weren't creating their own janky version of it to, you know, it was like from us, it made it work. People could patch stuff together. And so we were providing a key tool. And the manufacturers didn't have to write that tool because we actually provided it. So again, that's like lowering the friction for the end user. And then another thing actually I think that is probably also underestimated was things like Dante Virtual Sound Card. So we were literally, like I had no real concept of this actually until I did a tour in the US. And it was with Michael McDonald actually. He was he was one of Bruce's mates, so I think he runs ATK now. Right. But he was like consulting at the time, and he put together a bunch of people. And so we sat in his offices, and I would do these demos of, you know, here's the Dante controller, blah blah blah. And then the final bit was I would patch an audio signal into the first version of Dante Virtual Sound Card we had, like on a Mac. It would turn up in like a Logic channel strip, and then I'd mess around with the EQ. And people would go, you didn't tell me it could do that. And I was going like, yeah, of course it can do that. Like, it never occurred to me that, like,
that was the thing that would make their eyes light up.
Yeah. Because, like, to me, it's like if you design the networking properly, you get to build things like that with computers, and that was part of the overall vision. So I think it's got to do with providing the building blocks that manufacturers can put in their products. Having the tools that end users can actually use that are relatively low friction, and that's the plug and play behavior, things like Dante Controller, which is kind of table stakes. And then the third thing I think that really moved the needle was people were like, holy cow, I don't need to buy that like Firewire interface anymore. Sure. And that for me was a really core part of the vision, because the signals just get into the computer through the network port. You don't need an I/O box anymore to get it to happen.
What keeps the innovation, what keeps the customers and the end users still, I guess, fans of Dante? Like you're now more of a software business than perhaps you are a hardware business, and you're probably, as Chris was saying, there's most of the engineers on board are software engineers. And I'm fascinated by this idea of, you know, providing kind of a control and monitoring level that, you know, that you're sort of beta testing, I guess. I think it was a last Infocom that you were showing me, you know, how you can, you know, do sort of basic things at the moment, like control volume and this, that, and the other on Dante-enabled boxes. Like what's the big idea? Where are we headed? What's sort of in biggest writing on the whiteboard at the moment?
Yeah, so I think Audinate has for a long time has even from the very beginning actually, we had a sort of vision of really changing the way the AV industry kind of works. Once you start to distribute audio and video signals over over networks. So once you're using networks for the cabling or the distribution part, then it's very easy for those signals to get in and out of like compute. Like the compute platform could be an old school digital mixing console, like actually like a plug-in card. It could go in and get processed and get sent out. But it could also be any manner of different compute. It could be, like a Symmetrix D100, for example, which is really just a computer with a bunch of software on it. So that's always been the vision for where we might go. So the plan has for all time has been not so much to dominate the world of chips and modules and stuff that goes into network equipment. Don't get me wrong, that pays our salary, so that's awesome. But from a sort of big picture perspective, once you put the signals on the network, you can really start to do a lot more in software and then unlock a huge amount of innovation. So to me, I look towards the audio workstation world, digital audio workstations. There's so many people writing plugins. Absolute blossoming of creative potential of people writing plugins because there's a way of actually a software developer writing a plugin, getting access to the signal, doing something with it. Why can't we do that in installed AV systems? Okay. And the answer is because actually mostly it's mediated through physical boxes of various sorts. Right. So I think we've got a real opportunity to create a kind of platform. Like I like to talk about a three-legged stool. There's audio, video, and control. So every audio-visual system has all of those three components in it. And here I'm not necessarily talking about live sound. I'm talking about much broader market segments, commercial installed or installed AV systems of all sorts. There's pretty much always an audio bit, a video bit, and some kind of control function. You've got a button or a volume control or something. And then you need a way of getting it all to work together. So you need some kind of orchestration layer. So where I think we want to go is we want to provide those sorts of APIs and tools to allow people to start to develop the kind of software like that ecosystem of innovation that takes place in audio workstation world. Sure. But provide the platform layers that really enable installers, asset owners, integrators that are on the hook for supporting staff, all of those kinds of things. So they really want to be able to support those audiovisual systems, like potentially remotely, connected to networks, and then to be able to deliver new functionality, preferably in a software form, from a fairly wide variety of potential vendors. So that's the opportunity. Yeah. And that's a game changer for the industry. Yeah. That's like bringing IT revolution kind of mindset to the audiovisual industry.
Sure. And what might be an example that I could wrap my head around?
Point to right now? Yep. Yeah. I think the Symmetrix D100 is an interesting example of that because it's essentially a computer-based version of the previous Symmetrix DSP. There've been some, Shure did this with the IntelliMix DSP for a while as well. I think you can also point to people like QSC where actually it literally is a Linux box, but they do tend to bundle a lot of analog I/O and control functions into the one, vertically integrated manufacturer specific kind of solution. So I would argue this is happening, it's a trend that's happening in the industry. Manufacturers can roll their own networking technologies. So QSC has QLAN, Crestron has their own networking, the NVX bit. So manufacturers can roll their own, but really in the end, I think Audinate is as a company in the industry, we're uniquely lined up with, that group of end users who would really like to have, different brands mix and match and be able to have interoperability in the way that you get interoperability in the IT world.
Mm-hmm. But say, I'm Chris Holder, plug-in manufacturer, and I've developed what I think's the world's best auto mic mixer or something.
Yeah, exactly.
How would it work for me to get on the Symmetrix mainframe in the world?
That's So you did ask me about the future, and now you're sort of saying, how would I do it today? So there are certainly some pieces that need to be built out,
Sure.
like at this point. So we're working our way up in the sense that clearly we've got the audio signal distribution piece.
Yep.
We've been working in video signal distribution.
Yep.
Now we're doing much more in the way of control and management layers.
Gotcha.
So there you go, three legs of the stool.
Sure.
At some point, there does need to be a software API layer. You could think of it as VST or audio units or something like that.
Yeah.
So if you want to use the plugin analogy, it's like,
Yeah.
what's the equivalent of that that lets somebody get, write some software.
Yeah.
It's got to run somewhere. So where's it run? So that would be digital audio workstation software. It's like, what's the equivalent of that?
Sure.
And how do you control it?
Yep.
How do you expose some, knob or dial
Sure.
to that software?
Sure.
So you talked about whiteboards.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have those things actually at this point in time. I'm trying to paint a vision of like where this could go. And I really do believe that if we get the platform layers right, I think there's an existence proof that there's a whole stack of people that really enjoy developing audio and visual. So they're like engineering people, have creative interests in the signal processing part of the world. And at the moment that's stuck inside computers and it doesn't necessarily live in the spaces where people put audio visual systems in. So you get the benefit of all that cool software inside the box, but not inside the space, like the audio visual space that actually people interact in.
Yeah. And do you think that especially in Australia where we love to build out a system that might be best of breed and we like putting our own personality into exactly the way it's configured.
Yeah.
Do you fear, like perhaps I do, that we're headed more down just integrated systems that off the shelf, one name, ease of just, it's all going to work. So let's just do that.
Yeah.
And like, what does that mean for Audinate, if anything?
What does it mean for Audinate? How would I answer that? I think there are opportunities in there for Audinate kind of no matter what, like in the sense that if you're talking about, so one of the classic examples in this area is things like conferencing or unified communications, where you got things like Teams rooms or Zoom rooms, and there's a sense in which the user experience of those is being controlled by one of very large companies. And they're basically kind of, this is very automated and where it goes. But you get what you get with those, and they may not be creating the user experience that actually is wanted. So I think there's totally opportunities for Audinate there, because the more of those things, we turn all the microphones and speakers and amplifiers and cameras and things into things that are on the network. So there's absolutely opportunities for them to pull in those devices and make them part of that user experience in an automated fashion. On the other hand, I also think that they're very one size fits all. So if you want a different experience in a room, or the room is larger, or you've got an event space or something like that, where you're trying to do something a bit more like event spaces, like if it's a creative space, you probably just don't want to go, hey, that looks like Teams from work, right? So you probably do need to do something different at that point. And then there's totally a role for the user experience. So I really quite like the Avixa's way that it talks about being a user experience thing, not so much being a technology organization. And I think that's what audiovisual professionals actually ultimately do. It's a very technical profession, but they create a user experience for clients. I don't think that goes away. And I also feel like in the networking sense, or the Dante sense, if you can reduce a lot of the friction around making better, more complex systems, you can make that more tractable for the person. You can get rid of a lot of that mundane cookie cutter configuration crud that everyone has to do. Then you can actually start to really do more interesting things. And you can also start to talk to those software developers about cool stuff that, you can bring a piece of software from a live environment into like a more prosaic, like a museum or something, which is really a fixed install system of some kind.
Which leads me, I guess, to the dreaded AI question. Like, do you think AI, it's got to have a role, I guess, in sort of smoothing out some of those more mundane discovery and kind of, the stuff the boring stuff?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a role for it. In when I think about this, I do feel like we're in one of these sort of moments right now where people can sort of be very over enthusiastic about AI, and I think it's the kind of thing where, in the long term, it'll have big implications for what we do, and we actually don't really know what they are at this point.
Sure.
So it's yeah. So when I think about that, I kind of tend to temper my responses about this. In many ways, I think people are already using AI in audiovisual systems, but you're just not aware of it. So one example is you may remember the good old days of WebEx and the ball.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you remember? Have you got the ball or have I got the ball?
Oh,
The
I see.
sharing ball,
Right,
yeah, all
right.
that
No,
stuff, right?
no, thank
But do you
goodness.
remember audio quality with WebEx? And do you remember the gating, like we're turning on and off
Right.
mic? It was terrible.
Yeah, yeah.
So back in those days, just that sort of muting and automatic muting and unmuting of microphones actually was really quite janky in those older, conferencing systems. But if you look at something like Zoom and Teams now, those things, it's AI style. So it's like models
Yep.
learning on human voices,
Yep.
knowing what air conditioning is,
Sure.
all of those kinds of things. So that gating behavior is so much smoother
Yeah.
in things like, Teams and Zoom, and you wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity in there. I've been there's a company in Oregon, Alpha Labs, which has a AI model for dereverberation,
Okay.
which is just like you listen to that thing and you go, "Holy cow, that's amazing!"
Yeah.
So there's lots of very specific applications I think that people are already using it for in processing, particularly in video as
Yep.
well.
Yep.
I think one of the bigger areas for that could be applicable is what you're talking about in terms of configuration. There's a sense in which AI systems are kind of a way of transforming one description into another description. So if you can think about writing a decent spec in English for what a system should do, a room or a space, theoretically, if you wrote that spec down properly, it could spit out a lot of the configuration for you automatically. So I think those kinds of tools from manufacturers or system setup or, things like that. I can imagine even Dante routing, for example, like it's like all the speakers in this room are all part of the same group, patch them all together, job done, right? So instead of you going click, 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 maybe you can just say something sufficiently, with sufficiently low ambiguity that the AI system can actually figure out what you meant by it. So I think those sorts of things are entirely possible.
Aidan, thanks for spending the time with me and explaining, well, more than that, reflecting on the last 20 years and beyond. I guess I wanted to give you the opportunity to, reflect again, I guess, personally on what it's meant to you. My one observation is that you're quite a principled company. You had some aims up front, and it feels like, with your big idea that it could have gone in any number of ways, and you've no doubt had people probably clamoring for you to do things in a certain way, and it would have been quite tempting at various times to cash out or to maybe prostitute your original aims and philosophies. Like, how do you look back on the last 20 years as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's been a long story. I think I originally started Audinate because I didn't want to get to sort of, I mean, these days I'm like 55 kind of thing. I didn't want to get to sort of 50s and go, woulda, shoulda, the one that got away, really could have been, like could have done it, but didn't. So a lot of it, I'm quite thankful to my wife in terms of, being able, when I was 35, we had a couple of young kids, blah, blah, blah. So it's a commitment to
and a big risk.
dump cash in and then, go into a company and not necessarily know where it's going to go. So all of those things, I think, I think it's totally been worth it. I've always been a person that likes to build things and make things, and so I can see the kind of things that could be done with networking if we could get there. And the reflection, I guess, for me is we're not kind of done yet. Like I think. There's more to go, and we talked a little bit about the sort of software platform parts or what it could really do to unlock innovation. So I think the things that keep me going, I think, are more in terms of seeing the company continue to grow. There's a whole lot of new people inside Audinate, so there's a very generational thing going on. There's new talent coming through. I'm very struck by the younger generations of people that are kind of, it's going to maybe sound a little odd, but it's sort of like out there in maker space. Like if you go like hunting around YouTube, like I was watching this video. Again, this is going to sound weird. I was watching this video of some guy in Arizona forging like a Damascus steel like knife, kitchen knife.
Sure.
And this guy spent days doing this, and he's like really young guy with forging presses in his garage. So there's it feels like compared to what it was like when I was growing up, there's a wealth of information that's out there. People can learn to do things. Lots of people are they're trying things. Like you can think 3D printing, or you can think making your own bits of electronics or software or whatever. But even down to like forging stuff, like blacksmithing. And so I feel like there's a bit of a generational thing going on where I really do think there's going to be a burst of creativity that's generated by the ready access and availability of like how-to information that's kind of out there. And if we can set people up to really start to do that in audio-visual world, who knows what could happen in terms of potential innovation.
Yeah. If there's one thing that like a guiding light or a sort of a pole star, like that, I guess, keeps you on the straight and narrow from a company perspective.
Yeah.
Could there be something? Would you?
Yeah, look, I think the thing that the way that I came into the whole sort of Dante world is I had a problem that I wanted to solve as a user of audio and video equipment, and that has changed from sort of music and production stuff to being a more broad, audio visual systems are like everywhere, like railway stations, etc., etc. But they're a really big part of our lives. And so, like, for me, one of the big, like, whatever we do for manufacturers, like one of the questions I've been asking recently is, what do the things that Audinate serve? Like, so, if we're doing this, what does it serve? I would come back to actually probably like the persona I have in mind, or the person I have in mind, is the person who's on the hook for installing, making something run, making the conference route be perfect, making the church service go smoothly, making sure the announcements work properly and you can hear them at the railway station. So all of those kind of things. So there's somebody out there who's responsible for delivering that user experience. That's the person that I want to serve. And so the networking, the platform with the three legs of the stool, the software APIs, all those kind of things. That's who we want to get to. And manufacturers play their part, but Audinate doesn't exist to, like, it's almost a means to an end, like in the sense that we need to provide technology and tools for manufacturers so that people can actually build systems out of the networking and software components in the end. So that would be probably my takeaway from that.
That's good. Well, congratulations. And here's to the next 20 years.
Thank you. Well, I'll be pretty old by then.
Well, we'll keep these desks, these chairs free for 2045.
Yeah, we'll put them in a cupboard along with the Motu.
All right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks.